I'm Nico Nierenberg, CEO of Persyst, and this is an overview of Persyst 15. This version features new capabilities for intracranial review, intracranial electrode localization, and a neonatal seizure detector. Frequently, you'll be using Persyst integrated with your EEG manufacturer's software. But in this case, I'll be demonstrating using the Persyst database. The Persyst database has the ability to combine records in different manufacturers' formats. It also has the ability to combine multiple records that were recorded in short segments. For example, this record was recorded in 5-hour segments. Persyst has combined it into days and even into a 3-day complete record. You can open it as if it were one record. I can just start playing this at high speed without reference to how it was physically recorded. I can also view trends for this record across the multiple days. I'm going to open a 24-hour EMU record to illustrate features of Persyst trending. Typically, when we look at an EEG, we see 10 to 20 seconds at a time on a page. But when we look at the trends, we're looking at much longer periods of time, in this case 2 hours. Time is on the horizontal axis, and the different trends are on the vertical axis. A collection of trends is called a panel, and we can configure panels with different trends on them and adjust the trend parameters for the requirements of the patient population and the way we prefer to review. The page duration can be adjusted so that we can look for shorter events, or we can look for longer periods to see changes that are occurring more slowly. The first trend is artifact intensity, which shows the amount of muscle artifact, EMG, followed by vertical eye movement and lateral eye movement present in the EEG. In this case, we can see that the patient is awake. Next is seizure probability, which is the output of the neural network that Persyst uses to detect seizures. It will show if there is a probability that a seizure has occurred at a certain point in time. There are no seizure detections during this 2-hour period. Next, there is a measure of whether spikes are occurring at a relatively high rate of 3 per 10 seconds, with the spikes labeled in blue if they are maximal on the left, red if they are maximal on the right, yellow if they are bilateral, or green if they are generalized. Again, there are none of these types of detections in the first 2 hours. Next, we have the rhythmicity spectrogram with the left and right hemisphere, which shows the amount of rhythmic activity from low to high frequency, in this case from 1 Hz to 25 Hz. Darker colors show more rhythmic activity at the corresponding frequency. This patient has a somewhat unusual waking posterior dominant rhythm at about 10 Hz. The next trend is the FFT, which shows the amount of power from low frequency to high frequency. Again, time on the horizontal axis, frequency on the vertical axis. In this case, from 0 to 20 Hz. And you can again see the posterior dominant rhythm here. The next trend is asymmetry. This measures the difference between homologous electrodes on the left and right. When there is more power on the left, it shows a blue color. When there is more power on the right, it shows a red color, again from low to high frequency. During this period of 2 hours, it's just fluctuating around 0, so this is relatively symmetric. Next is the amplitude integrated EEG, which shows the amount of power in the EEG on a characteristic logarithmic scale. It's frequently used for neonatal recordings, but it can be used with any record, particularly where there's a change of amplitude or a change of symmetry occurring with a seizure. Next is the heart rate trend. This is calculated from the EKG channel in the EEG record on a continuous basis and can show the changes in heart rate over time. It can also show changes related to seizures. At the bottom are the versus baseline trends. In this case, the baseline has been set automatically. Persyst looks for a period of time where there is good recording quality and no seizure activity. You can also place a baseline in other time points and see the comparison to that time. Once a baseline is established, it will be used across subsequent recordings for that patient. In this case, you can very clearly see the posterior dominant rhythm. What's being displayed is the difference in standard deviations from the baseline, from -6 deviations in power to +6 standard deviations in power. This is an FFT spectrogram versus baseline, but versus baseline can be used with any trend. I can quickly move forward 2 hours by clicking here. And I can see on this page that there are no significant changes. Moving forward again, there's a change, and we can see on the artifact intensity that the artifact is dropping off as the patient falls asleep. Spike activity starts to increase to greater than 3 in 10 seconds, primarily on the left side, and then a seizure occurs. The seizure detector detects a seizure. The patient briefly wakes up. We can also see the seizure in the other trends. In the rhythmicity spectrogram, we see the evolution of the seizure from high to low frequency, with more of the rhythmic activity on the left side than on the right. On the FFT spectrogram, we can also see the evolution of the seizure. On the asymmetry trend, the symmetry started changing towards the left because of spike activity. There is an increasing number of spikes, followed by the very rapid spikes, followed by the seizure, which is focal on the left. In the amplitude integrated EEG, you see the classic split of amplitude. And finally, we see it very clearly on the versus baseline trend. In the heart rate trend, we can see the increase of the heart rate that occurs with the seizure, and in fact, it only returns to the original level after a fairly long period of time after the patient falls asleep. When we move forward in time, we'll see that another seizure occurs, and the evolution of the seizure signature looks very similar to the first one. This is the classic thing you can see in trending. Moving to the approximate seizure onset, we can switch to the EEG view. We can move back to the seizure onset, which is somewhere in here. As frequently happens, the EEG is somewhat obscured by EMG artifact, and this is where Persyst's unique artifact reduction can give us a clearer view. By clicking here, I can turn on artifact reduction. When I do that, the original signal is shown in the background, and the artifact-reduced EEG is shown in the foreground. This clearly shows the evolution of the seizure much more clearly. Unlike a high-frequency filter, the EEG is left in its original state, which you can see if we look here, and I turn the artifact reduction off and on. You'll see that the amplitude of the EEG and the shape of the EEG is not affected by the artifact reduction. This works by removing the signals associated with EMG from the overall signal without affecting the cerebral signal. When I go back to the trends, we see another important aspect of artifact reduction. The trends that we've been looking at have been computed after artifact reduction. If I turn off the artifact reduction, we see why this is so important. If you ignore the seizure detections and look at the other trends, you can see how difficult they would be to interpret without artifact reduction. Things like electrode artifact and EMG tend to obscure changes that are cerebral in nature, making it hard to pick out which of these are being caused by artifact and which of these are being caused by actual changes. Before the introduction of artifact reduction, it was difficult to use trends. You had to be very careful and refer to the EEG in order to identify artifact. In many cases, as a result, it didn't save a lot of time. Now, with artifact reduction, it is all much clearer. And of course, the neural networks benefit from this as well in order to increase their accuracy. Spike review provides a summary of the spikes that are detected in a particular record. The spikes are organized by where they are found to be maximal. In this case, the three spikes appear 1,204 times and other spikes less frequently. An average of all the spike waveforms are shown here for the group. By clicking on the group, you can see the individual spike events, as well as a summary and a voltage map. The voltage map on top shows a summary of all the spikes that have been previously selected as being exemplars or confirmed spikes. I can select more like this, and the bottom voltage map shows the ones I select. I can use this to confirm that they are similar to the exemplar spikes. I can also expand the size of the voltage maps, and I can show a propagation map. There are some other options for showing the selected average versus the confirmed average, or the individual selected spikes over the confirmed average. You can sort by time or by amplitude so that the more prominent spikes appear first. I can see the spikes in the EEG view by clicking here, and it'll take me to the individual events. The confirmed spikes can be used as input to our electrical source imaging solution. You can use ESI without selecting spikes, but if you do confirm spikes in spike review, then separate reports are created for the ones that you have confirmed. Persyst 15 also has a convenient spike counting tool. I'm going to open an ESES case in order to demonstrate this. You can see that the Persyst spike detector consistently marks the spikes in this case. I created a comment for a time interval, and we want to see the rate of spikes, what the rate of spikes are during that time. I can open the spike index tool. I mark the section that I was interested in with an @spike count comment. I set the epoch length to 1 second, and I set the threshold to at least one spike in that epoch. You could, of course, make different choices for those parameters. Then all I have to do is click Calculate, and it shows me that there is one segment that was selected. It's 600 seconds long, and the total number of spikes is 760 during that time period. The average spikes per second is 1.27, and 92% of the epochs exceeded the threshold of having one spike. This can be consistent marking across records, which could be an advantage versus having different readers marking spikes in different records. Of course, this doesn't just have to be used with ESES cases. It could be used in any case where counting the number of spikes is of interest. Persyst 15 has new capabilities for the review of intracranial records. I'm going to switch to an intracranial record to show this. This record is being shown in a bipolar montage, semi-automatically generated by Persyst 15. This montage is organized by the hardware groups present in the recorded montage. Persyst 15 will also generate bipolar overlap montages to save vertical space, and it will generate referential and referential overlap montages. These montages are then used to generate trends. In this case, we selected FFT trends, organized by the different hardware groups. These are FFTs of all the channels of the different hardware groups. One thing you can see in these FFT trends is the spike activity. The high rate of spike activity can especially be seen in this hardware group. I'm going to move forward in time. I'm on 15-minute pages, which is good for reviewing these records. Here you can see the first subclinical seizure, pretty much isolated to this one hardware group. If I click at the beginning of that seizure, I can change the time period, effectively zooming in on it. And I can see the evolution of that seizure. Persyst has also generated trends for each of the hardware groups, so I can see the individual channels. Now by channel, I can see the onset of that seizure, and I can go to the EEG to confirm it. We can see the onset of the seizure now in the EEG. Moving ahead in time, I can see a more prominent clinical seizure and what that looks like in this hardware group. Persyst 15 includes our new electrode localization application. This combines the recorded montage, the pre-implant MRI, and the post-implant CT. It provides a 3D view of the locations of the implanted electrodes. I'm using a different SEEG case to illustrate these features. Here we can see that the electrodes have been labeled. They're labeled in a semi-automatic fashion. You label a few of the electrodes, and then the application fills in the other electrodes automatically. We can have this 3D view. We can zoom in on it. We can change the opacity, look in two-dimensional space as well, and move through two-dimensional space. Results can be exported to DICOM. Functional electrode groups such as seizure, onset, sensory motor can also be created and their locations exported in DICOM format. These can be imported into surgical planning tools, for example. Persyst 15 has many new and improved features for the epilepsy monitoring unit. It is also very effective for continuous monitoring in the ICU. Of course, Persyst can be used to look for seizures using our seizure detection and our trends, but it can also monitor other features as well. Here is a lateralized periodic discharge case, where the discharges are maximal on the left. And as you can see, the spike detector is steadily marking the discharges. If I switch to a split screen view, we can see on the right, in a 1-hour time window, the lateralized periodic discharges being marked in blue. They're marked blue because they're maximum on the left. If they were maximum on the right, they'd be marked red. If they're generalized, they'd be marked in green. We can see that they're continuing throughout this time period without having to review every page of the EEG. Now I'm opening a generalized periodic discharge case. You can see these generalized discharges on the EEG left side here. They're marked by Persyst in green for generalized discharges. They do wane a bit at times, so here you can see a waning, perhaps from drug administration or some other state change. And you can actually see that the amplitude of the EEG is dropping. And then they resume later in the record. Observing how an EEG compares to a baseline can help detect changes over time. This is a record of an older adult patient under observation after experiencing a large right middle cerebral artery ischemic stroke. They were being monitored for increased intracranial pressure and seizures. Knowing the patient had a right-sided stroke, it makes sense that the EEG power is asymmetric, as indicated by the dark blue color in the asymmetry spectrogram. You can also see it in the FFT and AEG trends. There's a cyclical, oscillating pattern of brain function. Interestingly, this is echoed in the heart rate trend. As I move forward in time, the versus baseline trend down here, which had remained at baseline, now shows changes. The higher frequencies begin to drop out. I'll place my cursor here before the change, so you can see the EEG there, and then after the change here. And you can see the dropout in the higher frequencies. The patient was attended, and any clinical changes that corresponded to the EEG changes may have been difficult to detect, despite the fact that we can clearly see the changes in the trends. It wasn't until roughly 55 minutes later that the team suspected the patient was less responsive. They determined that this might have been due to increased intracranial pressure. As a result, they administered a dose of mannitol right around here. After the mannitol, it was 15 minutes later, around 14:40, that they felt the patient had somewhat improved clinically, but the EEG improved immediately after the dose of mannitol. The patient's EEG returned to the post-stroke baseline immediately after receiving mannitol. This supports the hypothesis that the worsening state was related to increasing intracranial pressure. The heart rate oscillating with brain function could also be related. The versus baseline trend can support recognition of important changes that may happen slowly over time and be difficult to recognize. Another new capability of Persyst 15 is the Neonatal Seizure Detector. I'll switch to a record from the NICU. I've changed EEG settings to reflect a neonatal review. For example, I've set a 30-second page size for the EEG. This can show slower patterns more clearly. Here we also use a double distance montage. The Neonatal Seizure Detector can work with further reduced montages. On the right side, we're showing a trends panel, customized for reviewing neonatal records. One thing I've added for this demo is the top section with expert marks. 0, 1, 2, or 3 experts may mark a seizure. We've included this for comparison to the detector. The red marks are where the Persyst detector marked a seizure. At this detection, 2 of the 3 expert readers also marked a seizure. You can see the pattern as we go along with 0 to 3 expert marks. On the other trends, it might be possible to see some of these seizures, though they aren't so easy to identify. The seizures continue as marked by the detector. They are marked variably by the reviewers. But at this point, there's a demonstrative seizure. All the experts and the detector marked this seizure. At this point, the patient received medication to stop the seizures. For the rest of the recording, there were no expert-marked seizures, nor are there marks from the seizure detector. This demonstrates its capability to avoid false positives. We hope this product helps with the difficult job of neonatal monitoring. This has been a quick overview of Persyst 15. There are many more features and things that can be customized. We're happy to go through that with you in more detail. We'll be making more in-depth videos of Persyst 15 in the future, and thanks for watching.